welcome to Starlight Sci-Fi, your gateway to thrilling science fiction stories. The Var'kesh Dominion had conquered over 1,000 star systems, each surrendering before their might. Their dreadnoughts were unmatched, their soldiers bred for war, their empire unstoppable. Or so they believed. Then came the distress signal from Outpost 49. It was a simple message, chilling in its clarity. Red alert. Human war vessel closing in. The Var'kesh High Command had never heard of humanity before. By the time they understood the threat, it was far too late. The Var'kesh Dominion had spent centuries forging an empire built on conquest. Their fleet spanned across 1,000 star systems, their rule enforced by massive dreadnoughts armed with planet-cracking weapons. No civilization had ever stood against them for long. Those who resisted were erased, their worlds turned to dust, their names forgotten in the void. When the distress signal from Outpost 49 came through, High Command barely paid attention at first. It was a routine message. Red alert, human war vessel closing in. Another minor species daring to resist. Another insignificant rebellion about to be crushed. They would deal with it like they had countless times before. But then the outpost went silent. No further transmissions, no status reports, no emergency beacon. The entire system, once a thriving supply hub for the Dominion's fleets, had simply vanished. The Var'kesh response was swift. A battle group of 7 dreadnoughts, supported by cruisers and interceptors, was dispatched to investigate. Each of these warships was powerful enough to reduce continents to slag. Whatever had attacked the outpost, whoever these humans were, would be made into an example. Yet as the Var'kesh fleet arrived, the first thing they noticed was the silence. There were no distress beacons, no emergency transmissions, not even automated defenses left operational. Outpost 49 hadn't just been attacked. It had been erased. Then they saw it, drifting in the debris field, motionless. A single human warship, its dark hull barely reflecting the distant starlight. It was unlike anything the Var'kesh had seen before. Most species in the galaxy built their warships to intimidate. Sleek, decorated vessels adorned with banners and insignias meant to inspire fear or pride. The human ship had none of that. It was ugly, brutal, a dark angular construct that seemed built solely for destruction, with none of the arrogance or grandeur the Var'kesh associated with power. It gave no signals, no signs of life, just a lifeless, drifting shell. Cautiously the fleet approached, scanning for survivors, weapons signatures, or energy readings. Nothing. Just cold metal in the void. Then, without warning, the Var'kesh dreadnought's systems flickered. It started small. Glitches in their targeting arrays, slight distortions in their sensor readings. Then their long-range communications cut out entirely. Alarmed, the fleet's commanders ordered a retreat to a safer distance. But it was too late. The human vessel came alive. It moved impossibly fast for something of its size, engines roaring to life without a single warning sign. One moment it was drifting, the next it was hunting. Before the Var'kesh fleet could react, their weapons shut down, their shielding systems overloaded, their engines failed one by one, as if something inside their ships was turning against them. This was no ordinary warship. It was a predator, and the hunt had just begun. Panic spread through the Var'kesh fleet as the human warship came to life. One moment it had been nothing more than a silent wreck drifting in the void. The next, it was a nightmare unleashed. It moved in a way no warship should. Too fast, too precise, too alive. The Var'kesh had fought hundreds of species before, had crushed fleets that outnumbered them, had shattered entire armadas. But nothing had ever moved like this. The lead dreadnought, Var'kesh, attempted to lock onto the target. its targeting systems struggling against the electronic storm now ravaging their fleet. Sensors flickered, displays flashed erratic warnings, weapons refused to fire. Then the ship vanished. One moment it was there, an ominous shadow in the debris field. The next, it had darted beneath the dreadnought's underbelly, moving faster than something that size had any right to. The only warning of its attack was a sudden surge of energy, then a devastating impact. A concentrated beam of pure destruction tore through the dreadnought's armored hull, bypassing shields as if they didn't exist. The Vashkar shuddered violently, massive hull plates peeling away like paper, the wound splitting open down to its reactor core. A second later, it detonated in a blinding explosion, taking half of its escorting cruisers with it. The remaining warships scrambled to regroup, but the human vessel was already among them, weaving through their ranks with terrifying efficiency. It was impossible to predict, impossible to counter, impossible to stop. No transmissions, no battle cries, no threats. Just death. Desperate, the Yaltheran, another dreadnought, unleashed a full spread of plasma torpedoes, firing blind into the chaos. A single torpedo should have been enough to gut a warship. The human ship dodged every one. It twisted and turned through the storm of incoming fire with movements so impossibly calculated that the Var'kesh began to wonder if it was piloted at all. Then, their own torpedoes reversed course. Impossible. They had fired them. The targeting systems had locked onto the human ship, hadn't they? But as the torpedoes looped back, their computers told a different story. They had never locked onto the human ship. They had locked onto themselves. A cruel trick, a trap, a hack. The Yaltheran barely had time to process what was happening before its own weapons annihilated it. The remaining Var'kesh ships tried to flee. It was no longer a battle. It had never been a battle. It had been a massacre from the moment they arrived. But the human warship did not pursue. Instead, it drifted back into the void, once more becoming a silent specter among the wreckage. No signal, no message. No explanation, just silence. The Var'kesh had believed themselves to be the hunters. Tonight, they had learned what it meant to be prey. The Var'kesh Dominion had never known fear. For centuries, their empire had crushed all opposition, expanding relentlessly across the stars. Their war fleets numbered in the thousands. Their armies were engineered for battle, and their rule was absolute. But now, something was wrong. The fleet sent to investigate Outpost 49 never returned. No distress signals, no final transmissions. Only eerie silence. At first, High Command assumed it was a technical failure. Perhaps a malfunction in the Outpost's relay system, or a rogue ion storm had interfered with communications. But then Outpost 67 went silent. Then Outpost 72, then Outpost 88. Entire sectors of Dominion space were going dark, one after another. No warnings, no calls for reinforcements, just erasure. High Command scrambled to respond. They sent patrols, scout vessels, even entire battle groups, each time expecting to find some trace of their missing forces. Each time, they found nothing. No debris, no survivors, no sign of battle. It was as if their fleets had simply ceased to exist. But the truth was far worse. After weeks of relentless disappearances, a fragmented transmission finally came through from the Torvash, a heavily armed cruiser assigned to investigate the growing crisis. The signal was distorted, barely readable, but the words were unmistakable. Human war vessel. Then static. The signal cut out before High Command could respond. The Torvash was never heard from again. Panic rippled through the Dominion's ruling elite. Who were these humans? No species had ever resisted the Var'kesh like this. None had ever fought without leaving a trace. The Dominion had faced rebellions, uprisings, and even desperate last stands. But never had they faced an enemy that did not speak, did not negotiate, and did not falter. Desperate for answers, intelligence officers scoured old records for any mention of humanity. The findings were unsettling. Unlike other species that fought for dominance or survival, humans fought for vengeance. They had survived extinction events, global wars, and internal conflicts that should have destroyed them. They were not conquerors, but survivors. When humanity went to war, it was never for expansion. It was because they had been wronged, and they never forgive. That was when the first long-range scan detected it. The human war vessel. Alone. A single ship, the same one that had been sighted at Outpost 49, the same one that had systematically dismantled every fleet sent after it. One ship, one vessel, destroying an empire. The Var'kesh High Command could no longer deny the truth. This was no rebellion. This was not an accident. This was a warning, and it was far from over. The Var'kesh Dominion had always believed war to be an art of power and intimidation. Their ships were monuments of conquest, massive dreadnoughts adorned with the banners of fallen worlds, their hulls etched with the names of crushed civilizations. Each ship was a symbol of superiority, designed not just to destroy but to instill fear before the first shot was fired. The human warship was nothing like that. Desperate for answers, the Dominion's intelligence officers pieced together scattered data from salvaged wreckage, corrupted logs, and fragmented sensor readings. What they discovered was disturbing. Human warships were not built for intimidation. They were not built to impose dominance or demand surrender. They were built to end wars. The Dominion had expected a colossal juggernaut, something akin to their own dreadnoughts, an imposing fortress with towering weapons arrays and impregnable shields. Instead, the human warship was small, agile. Its armored plating was dense but minimal, covering only where necessary. It had no excessive ornamentation, no wasted space, no luxury for officers or crew. Every inch of the vessel was designed for function, not display. And its weapons? The Var'kesh were accustomed to brute force warfare, planet-cracking cannons, fleets of automated drones, and massive plasma batteries designed to burn through entire star systems. But the human ship didn't rely on sheer firepower. It was a surgical instrument of destruction. Adaptive weaponry allowed it to analyze and counter enemy defenses in real time. Its electronic warfare suite could hijack enemy targeting systems, turning their own weapons against them. It carried no standard torpedoes or predictable munitions. Instead, its payloads altered mid-battle, adjusting their attack methods to exploit weaknesses as soon as they were detected. And worst of all, it fought like it already knew its enemy. Every Dominion fleet sent against it was torn apart with precision, as if the human ship had studied their tactics for centuries. It jammed their sensors before they could react. It bypassed their shields as if they didn't exist. It moved faster than their ships could track, struck before they could counter, and vanished before they could retaliate. This was not technology alone. This was warfare perfected. A Dominion scientist, after analyzing the wreckage of a Var'kesh battlecruiser disabled without a single direct hit, made a chilling observation. They do not build warships for conquest. They build them for vengeance. High Command reviewed the report in stunned silence. The human ship's every system, every weapon, every strategic maneuver had been designed with one goal: not to rule, not to occupy, but to eliminate the enemy completely. And if a single warship had done this much damage, how many more of them were out there? The Dominion had spent centuries believing themselves unmatched. Now, for the first time in their history, they realized they had made a mistake. And humans did not forgive mistakes. The Var'kesh Dominion had never considered humanity a threat. They were a minor species, insignificant in the grand scale of the cosmos. They lacked an empire, had no vast fleets, and did not sit at the table of the galactic superpowers. To the Dominion, they were nothing. But now High Command was forced to face a grim truth. They had miscalculated. Reports from the disappearing outposts had been dismissed as anomalies. Warnings from scouts had been ignored. Even after entire battle groups vanished without a trace, the Dominion still refused to believe that a single human warship could be responsible. The very idea was absurd, until the Reminicourt massacre was uncovered. Buried deep in classified Dominion archives, the record spoke of a forgotten campaign, centuries old. The Dominion had encountered humanity before. A single colony world, isolated and defenseless, had been in their path. A minor skirmish, barely worth noting in the history of their conquests. The colony had refused to surrender, so the Dominion did what they had always done. They erased it. Every city, every settlement, every last human. Not a single survivor. Or so they thought. High Command now understood the truth. The warship hunting them was not the vanguard of an empire. It was not part of some grand human fleet seeking conquest. It was the last remnant of the forgotten. A single warship, forged in secrecy, born in vengeance. Humanity had not been wiped out. They had survived in the shadows, waiting, watching, preparing. For centuries they had studied the Dominion, learned their tactics, their weaknesses, their overconfidence. And now they had returned. The Var'kesh scrambled to respond. Entire armadas were mobilized, thousands of ships assembling to counter a foe they had once dismissed. Defense grids were activated, fortress worlds reinforced, fleets repositioned. If humanity had more ships like this one, the Dominion would be ready. But that was the problem. There was no human fleet, no invasion force, no diplomats, no warning. Only one ship, and it was already here. The Dominion's flagship station, a fortified command hub orbiting a core world, was the most secure installation in their empire. Its defenses were unparalleled, its fleet unbreakable. It was the seat of their power, where the highest rulers dictated the fate of entire species. But as the human warship emerged from the void, the impossible happened. The station's defenses went offline. The fleet, thousands of warships standing between humanity and vengeance, shut down. Every system turned against them. Every weapon refused to fire. And from the silent depths of space, the last remnant of humanity sent its final message. Not in words, but in fire. And the Var'kesh Dominion, rulers of 1,000 worlds, learned what it truly meant to be hunted. For centuries, the Var'kesh Dominion had ruled without fear. Their fleets darkened the skies of conquered worlds. Their war engines ground entire civilizations into dust. They had never known defeat. Until now, the human warship had arrived at the heart of their empire, not as an armada, not as an invasion force, but as a single blade of vengeance. And that was all it needed to be. The Dominion's flagship station, an impenetrable fortress in orbit above their capital world, was the very symbol of their power. No enemy had ever reached it. No war had ever come close. The station commanded entire fleets, controlled millions of soldiers, and directed the unchallenged expansion of the Dominion. Now it was defenseless. It began with a whisper in the station's systems, a flicker in the energy grid, a momentary lag in the targeting arrays, a minor disruption hardly worth noting, until it spread. Shield generators failed, not shattered, not overloaded, simply deactivated. Weapon control systems went dark, not destroyed, not jammed, just silent. Starships that had stood ready for battle drifted helplessly, their engines unresponsive. Thousands of Var'kesh vessels, from small interceptors to dreadnoughts the size of cities, were now little more than floating tombs. Panic spread through the station. Commanders barked frantic orders. Technicians scrambled to restore control. But their own systems betrayed them. Doors sealed at random, defense turrets turned on their own personnel, escape pods jettisoned themselves, empty. And then, through the silent void, the human warship moved. It did not unleash a bombardment. It did not fire recklessly. It struck with precision. The first shot lanced through the station's primary reactor core. A controlled strike. Not to destroy, but to cripple. The lights within the station flickered as its vast power reserves bled away. The second shot severed communication towers, isolating the Dominion's rulers from the rest of their empire. No calls for help, no warnings, just silence. The third and final shot was the most devastating. A single projectile burrowing deep into the heart of the station, bypassing layers of armor like they were paper. It did not explode. Instead, it buried itself in the command center, waiting. Seconds passed. Then the station's own voice spoke. Every screen, every device, every transmission across the Dominion's networks displayed a single, chilling message. Your reign ends today. And then the warhead detonated. Not with a firestorm, not with the destruction of worlds, but with the collapse of everything they had built. A pulse of pure, calculated energy surged through the Dominion's core systems. Every database corrupted, every control network severed, every fleet, every army, every weapon the Dominion had ever relied upon rendered useless. In a single moment, centuries of dominance unraveled. The Var'kesh Dominion had ruled unchallenged for generations. Now, in the span of a heartbeat, they had ceased to exist. The Var'kesh Dominion, once the unchallenged rulers of 1,000 worlds, had fallen, not to an armada, not to a great uprising, but to a single warship. The station that had been their seat of power now drifted as a silent wreck, its shattered remains scattering across the void. The Empire's fleets, once countless and unstoppable, hung dead in space, their systems still locked, their weapons still cold. The Var'kesh homeworld, once the center of a vast dominion, was powerless. Its planetary defense grids were useless, its leaders isolated, its people staring into the sky as the ruins of their own war machine rained down upon them like falling stars. And the human warship? It was gone. No message, no declaration of victory, no demands. Just as it had appeared from the void, it had vanished, leaving behind only devastation and silence. But the Dominion's fall was far from over. Across their empire, the conquered worlds they had ruled with an iron grip began to rise. Without the fleets to keep them in chains, rebellions erupted like wildfire. Worlds that had suffered beneath Var'kesh tyranny for generations finally saw their chance. Across the Empire's fractured remains, banners of defiance were raised. Ships that had once been forced to serve the Dominion now turned their weapons on their former masters. Entire systems broke away overnight, eager to be free of the rule of the defeated. There was no one left to stop them. High Command had been on the flagship station when it fell. The ruling council, those who had once believed themselves untouchable, were either dead or stranded on a planet, with no way to command their crumbling empire. The Var'kesh tried to salvage what they could. They attempted to rally what few ships remained operational, to rebuild what had been lost. But it was too late. The galaxy had seen them bleed, and no one had any reason to fear them anymore. Among the ruins of their once mighty dominion, whispers spread, not of war, not of conquest, but of a name the Var'kesh had tried to erase. Humanity, a species they had dismissed, a species they had exterminated, or so they thought. And yet, against all odds, a remnant had survived, and it had never forgotten. The message was clear. Humans did not wage war for power. They did not fight for expansion. They fought for vengeance. And when humanity came for you, there would be no negotiations, no mercy, no escape. The last of the Var'kesh survivors could only watch as their empire crumbled around them. And somewhere, out there in the endless void, a lone warship drifted once more into the shadows, waiting, because humans never forget.